Welcome to Best Breaking News, which once again the things you might not know for today. We, Group 6, represent you anecdotes from British history with the topic Social Darwinism and Autobiography of Carl Pearson.
Darwinism, theory of the evolutionary mechanism propounded by Charles Darwin as an explanation of organic change. It denotes Darwin's specific view that evolution is driven mainly by natural selection. Beginning in 1837, Darwin proceeded to work on the now well understood concept that evolution is essentially brought about by the interplay of three principles. First, variation, a liberalizing factor, which Darwin did not attempt to explain, present in all forms of life. Second, heredity, the conservative force that transmits similar organic form from one generation to another. And third, the struggle for existence, which determines the variations that will confer advantages in a given environment, thus altering species through a selective reproductive rate. On the basis of newer knowledge, Neo-Darwinism has superseded the earlier concept and purged it of Darwin's lingering attachment to the Lamarckian theory of inheritance of acquired characters. Present knowledge of the mechanisms of inheritance are such that modern scientists can distinguish more satisfactorily than Darwin between non-inheritable bodily variation and variation of a genuinely inheritable kind. When compared to social Darwinism, it is a loose set of ideologies that emerged in the late 18th, in which Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection was used to justify certain political, social, or economic views. Social Darwinists believe in survival of the fittest, the idea that certain people become powerful in society because they are innately better. Social Darwinism has been used to justify imperialism, racism, eugenics, and social inequality at various times over the past century and a half. Next, evolution and natural selection. According to Darwin's theory of evolution, only the plants and animals best adapted to their environment will survive to reproduce and transfer their genes to the next generation. Animals and plants that are poorly adapted to their environment will not survive to reproduce. Charles Darwin published his notions on natural selection and the theory of evolution in his influential 1859 book on the origins of species. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection was a scientific theory focuses on explaining his observations about biological diversity and why different species of plants and animals look different. Moving on to the survival of the fittest and laissez-faire capitalism. After Darwin published his theories on biological evolution and natural selection, Herbert Spencer drew further parallels between his economic theories and Darwin's scientific principles. Spencer applied the idea of survival of the fittest to so-called laissez-faire or unrestrained capitalism during the Industrial Revolution, in which businesses are allowed to operate with little regulation from the government. Unlike Darwin, Spencer believed that people could genetically pass learned qualities such as frugality and morality on to their children. Spencer opposes any laws that help workers, the poor, and those he deemed genetically weak. Such laws, he argued, would go against the evolution of civilization by delaying the extinction of the unfit. Another prominent social Darwinist was American economist named William Graham Sumner. He was an early opponent of the welfare state. He viewed individual competition for property and social status as a tool for eliminating the weak and immoral of the population. In terms of eugenics, as social Darwinist rationalizations of inequality gained popularity in the late 18th, British scholar Sir Francis Galton, who is a half-cousin of Darwin, launched a new science aimed at improving the human race by ridding society of its undesirables, which he called eugenics. Galton proposed to be better humankind by propagating the British elite. He argued that social institutions such as welfare and mental asylums allowed inferior humans to survive and reproduce at higher levels than their superior counterparts in Britain's wealthy class. Galton's ideas never really took hold in his country, but they became popular in America, where the concepts of eugenics quickly gained strength. Eugenics became a popular social movement in the United States that peaked in the 1920s and 1930s. Books and films promoted eugenics, while local fairs and exhibitions held feeder family and bear baby competitions around the country. The eugenics movement in the United States focuses on eliminating undesirable traits from the population. Proponents of the eugenics movement reasoned the best way to do this was by preventing unfit individuals from having children. During the first part of the 20th century, 32 U.S. states passed laws that resulted in the forced sterilization of more than 64,000 Americans, including immigrants, people of color, unmarried mothers, and the mentally ill.
So, moving on to Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler, one of the world's most notorious eugenicists, drew inspiration from California's forced sterilizations of the feeble-minded in deciding Nazi Germany's racially based policies. Hitler began reading about eugenics and social Darwinism while he was in prison, following a failed 1924 coup attempt known as the Beer Hall Putsch. Hitler adopted the social Darwinist take on survival of the fittest. He believed the German master race had grown weak due to the influence of non-aliens in Germany. To Hitler, survival of the German Aryan race depended on its ability to maintain the purity of its gene pool. The Nazis targeted certain groups or races that they considered biologically inferior for extermination. These included Jews, Roma or Gypsies, Poles, Soviets, people with disabilities, and homosexuals. By the end of World War II, social Darwinists and eugenic theories had fallen out of favor in the United States and much of Europe, partly due to their associations with Nazi programs and propaganda, and because these theories were scientifically unfounded. In conclusion, social Darwinism truly existed in the minds of society rather than the philosopher Herbert Spencer. It didn't have much of an effect on how society lived its life because it reinforced the competitive and materialistic nature that had become so prevalent in the late 19th century. Due to social Darwinism, more people saw that because science says it is natural to screw over those beneath you, I guess I should. People didn't alter any part of their behavior when the concept came along. The concept, possible thanks to the scientific work of Lamarck and Darwin in the field of evolution. Lamarck has started the journey of asking the right questions but coming up with the wrong answers. Knowing what was wrong, Darwin came in and filled in the blanks. In between the two evolutionary theories, Spencer was at work piecing together society and science. This was only natural for a sociologist trying to explain the common and natural ways of people. Spencer achieved his goal of defining the people of his era. He supported big business, stepped on the little guys, and wanted very little government interference in the government. Without the work of these three men, the world might not have seen racism on such a large scale, and nationalist uprisings based on expelling minorities throughout the 19th and the 20th centuries. Minorities were seen as the less fit creatures, and social Darwinism stated that it was okay to mistreat the poor because the natural process had put them there. The next important figure is Carl Pearson, British statistician, leading founder of the modern field of statistics, prominent proponent of eugenics, and influential interpreter of the philosophy and social role of science. Pearson was descended on both sides of his family from Yorkshire Quakers, and although he was brought up in the Church of England and as an adult adhered to agnosticism all the way through, he always identified with his Quaker ancestry. Until about age 24, it seemed that he would follow his father, a barrister who rose the Queen's Counsel, into the law. But he was tempted by many possible careers. In 1825, Pearson won a scholarship to King's College, University of Cambridge, where he worked with the famous mathematics tutor Edward Root to achieve the rank of third wrangler in the higher competitive mathematical tripods of 1879. Also during his college years, having lost his religious faith, he read intensely in German philosophy and literature, and afterward he traveled to Germany for a year of study in philosophy, physics, and law. Back in London, Pearson gave extension lectures on German history and folklore, and he participated in the upsurge of interest in socialism, proposing himself to Karl Marx as the English translator of the existing volume of Das Kapital. In 1885, he founded a men and women club to discuss, from an anthropological and historical perspective, the social position of women and the possibility of non-sexual friendship between men and women. After the group disbanded in 1889, he proposed to the club secretary, Mary Sharp, who married him in 1890, following a stormy engagement. In 1884, Pearson was appointed professor of applied mathematics and mechanics at University College London. He taught graphical methods mainly to engineering students, and this work formed the basis for his original interest in statistics. In 1892, he published The Grammar of Science, in which he argued that the scientific method is essentially descriptive rather than explanatory. Soon, he was making the same argument about statistics, emphasizing especially the importance of quantifications for biology, medicine, and social science. It was the problem of measuring the effects of natural selection brought to him by his colleague Walter F.R. Weldon that captivated Pearson and turned statistics into his personal, scientific mission. They worked on much to Francis Galton, who especially sought to apply statistical reasoning to the study of biological evolution and eugenics. Pearson likewise was intensely devoted to the development of mathematical theory of evolution, and he became an assured advocate for eugenics. Through his mathematical work and his institution building, Pearson played a leading role in the creation of the modern statistics. The basis for his statistical mathematics came from a long tradition of work on the method of least squares approximation, wrought out early in the 19th century in order to estimate quantities from repeated astronomical and geodetic measures using probability theory. Pearson drew from these studies in creating new field, whose task it was to manage and make interference from data in almost every field. His positivistic philosophy of science provided a persuasive justification for statistical reasoning and inspired many champions of the quantification of the biological and social sciences during the early decades of the 20th century. As statistician, Pearson emphasized measuring correlations and fitting curves to the data, and for the latter purpose, he developed the new chi-square distribution. Rather than just dealing with mathematical theory, Pearson's papers most often applied the tools of statistics of scientific problems. With the help of his first assistant, George Woodley Yule, Pearson built up a biometric laboratory on the model of the engineering laboratory at University College. As his resources expanded, he was able to recruit a devoted group of female assistants and associations of more transitory male ones. The immersion schools gathered medical and educational data, calculated tables, and derived and applied new ideas in statistics. In 1901, assisted by Weldon and Galton, Pearson founded the journal Biometrica, the first journal of modern statistics. Pearson's grand claims for statistics led him into a series of bitter controversies. His prevalence for the analysis of continuous curves rather than discrete units of antagonized William Benson, a pioneering Mendelian geneticist. Pearson battled with doctors and economists who used statistics without mastering the mathematics or who emphasized environmental over hereditary causation. And he fought with a long line of fellow statisticians, including many of his own students, such as Yule, Mr. Greenwood, and Raymond Pearl. The bitterest of these disputes was with Reynolds Almore Fisher, in the 1920s and 30s. As Fisher's reputation grew, Pearson's dimmed. Upon his retirement in 1933, Pearson's position at University College was divided between Fisher and Pearson's son, Egon. Isn't this boring and interesting at the same time? But unfortunately, we have to end this. Well, I guess we have to say our goodbyes. Farewell, people.